Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to Versus Stars podcast. How my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. And remember, click the subscribe button, everybody. It's an amazing episode called Mike Carlin boards the mothership. He's been the group editor for Superman and DC's Entertainment's creative director of animation. Come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Carlin. Thank you so much for coming to Versus Stars podcast.
What else do I have to do on a Friday afternoon?
Well, it's an honor to have you on my show. You're awesome. So thank you so much for coming on.
Well, I am on. I may argue with the awesome part.
So I always start off with the question of inspiration. So what inspired your love of comics and who your earliest influences?
Okay. My love of comics came from my mother, believe it or not. And people my age used to have mothers that would rip up their comics or throw them away or whatever. My mother was a comic fan when she was a kid, and she loved Superman and Wonder Woman. She didn't really care about Batman, but I got him from TV when I was a kid. And honestly, she's the one who noticed an article about a comic convention in the newspaper, and she brought me to my first convention when I was 11 years old.
Oh, wow.
And she would go around and haggle with people to get better deals on comics, and I would go around and get autographs from my favorite artists. So it was really fun. And when we'd come home with all the comics that I got, she would read them when I went to bed.
That's awesome.
Yeah, my mom was pretty cool, and she was she was a big fan of the EC horror comics, which is pretty funny.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So these older conventions, where were these conventions like? I assume they're not like their conventions are nowadays.
Well, they were kind of the beginnings of that. These were Phil Seuling's conventions in New York City. So they would have them every 4th of July weekend. Happy anniversary. And he would get all the local talent, and there was guys selling back issues and things like that. Before the comic book price guide came out, there would even be people sitting in the halls selling their collections for any money they wanted.
Right.
And you could get some good deals.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was great. And for, in New York at the time, most of the talent lived in New York because they needed to go in and drop off pages and pick up checks and things like that. Only I think Kirby was one of the first people who moved away from Long Island and Connecticut, the New York area, to California once they started trusting the mail better, and they were able to track packages. And he was also such a machine that he would send whole issues in done. So it wasn't like when I was an editor, we were literally sending 1 and 2 pages around just to keep on the schedule with FedEx. So yeah, they were all in New York, so they all came to the conventions, and I got to meet, Neal Adams and Howard Chaykin and Gil Kane. Gil Kane always smelled like a new haircut. It was really very also an inspiration.
That is awesome. That's a hell of a time to live as a comic book fan back when you could actually talk to these guys. So right now conventions tend to be, it feels like long lines where you kind of just like get your signature and you kind of like have to walk away.
Well, there's still some conventions. There's the smaller ones that are very comic book centric. I mean, San Diego has gone way past that at this point, but I understand that I went to Heroes Con one time years ago, but I understand that that's very comic book friendly in North Carolina, I think it is. And that's apparently very much comic book creator centric, and it's look for those kind of shows if that's what you like to deal with.
Yeah, the big shows around where and the ones I'm going to be going to soon. I have a press pass to go to Terrificon in Connecticut, and then I have a Rhode Island Comic Con in Rhode Island.
Terrificon, I went to Terrificon one time, and it's a great show as well. For comic book creators, they do have some, celebrity type people come in too, but that's fun. It's that there's fun stuff there. But I know for a fact that Dan Jurgens and Jerry Ordway from my crew and Brett Breeding will be there this year. So say hi for me.
Oh, totally will. I've been able to meet Mr. Breeding and Mr. Jurgens at Terrificon. I think it was last year or the year before that. I was there. I do have their autographs on my wall. My entire wall is wallpapered with autographs of comic books. It's because I'm an autograph nerd. So it's all lined up, and I know I have two.
We like what we like.
Exactly. And I think I met Mr. Ordway at Plastic City Comic Con
Yeah.
when he was there. I think that was like that was pre-pandemic.
Well, he's a local guy, so that's his convention. So, and
Mm.
he draws their poster and their T-shirts and stuff like that all the time. So he'll be there, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's a really good show. So when you told your mother that you were going to study cartooning at the School of Visual Arts, what was her reaction to that?
Well, my mother was the one who researched the idea of going to a high school for art. I
Oh
went to
wow.
the High School of Art and Design first in Manhattan, which was a public school. So I went right from good old St. Bridget's Catholic School into I had to take an art test that you had to go to the high school and do drawings and show a portfolio, and they selected their students at this high school. So I got selected to go to this high school. And then while I was going to this high school, uh, my art teacher, they had cartooning classes and animation classes. I got selected to be an intern at DC.
Mm.
And that was pretty cool.
I bet.
Going up to the real offices was really amazing. It was 1974, so I was 16, and it was just great. I sat right outside Julie Schwartz's office, and he barely said hello, but I could hear him plotting stories with Carrie Bates and Elliot Magan,
Awesome.
and it was really, really great. And the best thing was one day I was just sitting there doing my drawings, and Burt Ward came in dressed in the Robin costume.
Mm.
And that was cool.
I bet.
That was cool. He shook my hand and said, "Hello, citizen." And that made my life.
That is amazing.
Yeah,
I
that was
mean,
fun.
it's cool. I mean, you're definitely in the right place at the right time, as you said, living in New York.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about what you would have done if you were not in New York, trying to break in?
I meet other people who have, like, my old buddy Mark Grunwald from Marvel Comics. He moved from the Midwest to New York to get into comics.
Oh wow.
And it's like, he worked in a bank before he got in and all that kind of stuff. And it's just like, I don't think I would have had the guts to do that. I'm basically a chicken, and I would not, I didn't trust that I was that necessary. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who are watching this who would agree, but I turned out to be nearby and necessary. So I didn't think it myself. And then going to I went from the high school thing, which was pretty cool. We had good teachers at that high school too. Bernie Kriegstein, who used to draw for
Mm.
EC, was a teacher there, and I got to go through that. And then my mother also insisted that I go to college. I thought I would just go and start trying to get work,
Yeah.
and she was like, "Nope, nope, you're going to college." And she arranged it, so we got a loan, which I paid off as quickly as I could. But
Mm.
it was ultimately her doing, and I said, "All right, I'll take 4 more years of goofing off." But goofing off with Harvey Kurtzman and Will Eisner is
Mm.
is a different level of goofing off, and so that was really great, and it was a good time.
So when you went to the School of Visual Arts for cartooning, what did that entail? Because I don't know. I mean, I don't know if cartooning counts as. I mean, it's necessarily a major now in school, or they call it something different in
No,
schools now.
it was a major back at the School of Visual Arts.
Is it still called that now? That major?
I
Do you
think
know?
so.
Oh, okay.
If it changed, maybe it's graphic novelizations or
Okay,
something, maybe something more
maybe.
lofty. But yeah, it was that. And the thing that was good about the School of Visual Arts was the first year you go there, they make you take everything.
Mm.
So they get to see what you're good at, you get to see what you like. So then you can pick and choose. And
Mm.
I picked cartooning, and I did study animation there as well. And that stuff was great. And it turned out to be the two areas that I would use and be involved in my whole life. So it
Mm.
was really great.
So, what kind of things did you learn studying cartooning at School of Visual Arts?
Well, I mean, a lot of it I just, I would pick up by osmosis just from my own reading and stuff like that.
Mm.
But when you have a teacher like Will Eisner, you're going to learn about storytelling. You're going to learn about, uh, sequential, uh, like the whole concept of filling in the blanks between panels, to know what to put in and what to leave out, to know if you've left out too much so that people wouldn't understand what they're looking at, and the idea of being able to maybe read it even if there's no words on it, and understanding it, that kind of thing. And with Harvey Kurtzman, an area that I think, better at was learning the gag cartoons and doing the funny stuff. Though there was already a dwindling market for that kind of stuff, and it was National Lampoon and the New Yorker were pretty much the only places to get those gigs, and they were tight gigs to get. You had to be really amazing. I have all my rejection letters from National Lampoon and New Yorker.
You kept them?
What?
You kept them?
Yeah. Someday I'm gonna make a collage and frame it. I'm running out of some days though, but it's just like you just yeah. It was really, it was the right, again. All of this is in New York, so that was a helpful thing. At the same time, nowadays, you can live in England, you can live in Singapore, you can live anywhere, and if your work is good enough, it can be seen with a click of your enter button. It's definitely, I think it's hard to get in, but I think in a ways there's a lot more ways you can get in now than there were in the old days.
Now, from an educational standpoint, did you think you learned more at the School of Visual Arts or more as an intern?
School of Visual Arts. The intern thing was, like I said, it was only 6 months, and it was also, there weren't a lot of people who were sitting around talking to you. We were more in the way than anything else. I was there to Xerox stuff, but I got to Xerox Kirby Commandy pages and Bernie Wrightson Swamp Thing pages and Walt Simonson's Manhunter Batman pages. So I was seeing the choice stuff from the early 70s.
That's awesome.
And it was I learned from looking at that stuff, and then I would make extra copies for myself and then go home and practice inking on top of it.
Oh, that is awesome.
Yeah, don't tell them.
Oh, they didn't know you were doing it at the time? You were sneaking it?
Stealing their Xerox paper. But I was such a shitty inker that I never even showed them to anybody.
That is awesome. Well, what was it like then to see some of this? I mean, Bernie Wrightson is known for some of the most beautiful pages you'll ever see on a comic book page. So what was it like to be the first one with eyes on those pages?
Well, I mean, my favorite artist at the time was Neal Adams, who was also very realistic and detailed. And in my head, my own art always looked like Neal Adams or Bernie Wrightson, but more Neal Adams. And by Xeroxing those pages, I guess I did learn more at the internship, because I learned that I would never make it as a comic book artist because would never have the patience to get really good at this. And I said, I'm better at the funny stuff anyway. So I just said, I'm going to concentrate on doing cartoons, and maybe I'll get a comic strip or something. I have rejection slips from King Features and all that too. So I thought I would try that stuff. And, and honestly, it is how I ultimately got in, because I brought a portfolio when School of Visual Arts was over. I brought a portfolio of funny stuff to Crazy Magazine at Marvel Comics. I said, Mad Magazine is pretty much a closed shop. They have the usual gang of idiots are called the usual gang of idiots because they're usual.
Yeah.
And then I thought Cracked. I was like, I looked at who the publisher was. I'd never heard of it. And I was like, I don't know if this is a good company or a bad company or what. And then Crazy was published by Marvel, and I was a comic fan, so I knew who they were. And I said, I figure they're paying Jack Kirby, so they if I do get work, I'll get paid. So I just looked who the art director was on Crazy, and I called up Marie Severin. And she said, oh, well, the way it works here is that, you have to talk to the editor, and I brought my portfolio up to Larry Hama, who was the editor of Crazy at that time, and a guy named Jim Owsley, who is now Christopher Priest, was his assistant editor on Crazy, and they looked at my stuff, and and Larry said that my drawings were okay, but he really liked my jokes. And he was exactly right. I don't think I'm a great artist. I think I'm good enough to get across my ideas, but the idea is where I have the most value. So I got into Marvel by doing the funny stuff, and I did Crazy magazine for a year. And honestly, Larry called me up and said, "Hey, you ever want to be an assistant editor?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then I whispered to myself, "What's that? What does that mean? I don't know what that is, but I want to do it because it's a job and it's at Marvel." So I interviewed with Mark Grunwald, and I got into the straight superhero side of things.
That is awesome. I mean, you so many names of legendary people you were surrounded by for all those years. That must be fantastic.
Well, they were already people who were legendary to me. I mean, Marie Severin was something else, but since my teachers were Harvey Kurtzman and Will Eisner, I was used to talking to somebody who I had known their work for years. So it was a little easier, but it was still like, oh my God, it's Marie Severin. This is pretty big. And Larry Hama had already been doing comics for 10 years by the time by the time I met him. So I was definitely nervous about it. But honestly, Marvel at that time was so cool. It was the best. Everybody was fun. It was it was exactly what you imagine a comic book company to be. And even while it was happening, I knew it was going to be the good old days. It was definitely a lot of fun. And a lot of the reason for that was that Mark Grunwald was a kook.
Yeah. What was your best? You have a great story with them?
Oh, great. We could do this for years if you want.
So, what's your best Grunwald story?
I don't know what a good Grunwald story is. The famous stuff is that there was a ad campaign in the subways in New York that had the anchor crew pictured prominently, and one of the anchors on the Channel 2 news was Michelle Marsh. And Mark decided he wanted to wallpaper our office with Michelle Marsh posters. So he made the offer. He said, "I'll pay anyone $1 who brings me one of these posters." And back then, you could actually steal the posters off the subway pretty easily. And a lot of people made a lot of money. And we wallpapered that office pretty good. And it was like everything was covered. The drawers were covered and cut out so you could open them. And it was Michelle Marsh posters and the ceiling lights and everything. It was crazy. And what did it mean? I don't know. I think it meant that Mark thought Michelle Marsh was cute.
That's crazy. So you eventually moved from Marvel to DC, and you became the group editor for Superman. So what precipitated this move for you?
Well, the editor in chief at Marvel said that I was not a good editor, and he fired me.
Oh wow!
And I called up other people who had left Marvel before me, like Denny O'Neil. And I called up Denny and I said, "Hey, I just got fired." And Denny said, "Well, I don't have anything here for you, but I'll buy you lunch." And I was like, "All right." We went to lunch. We talked about things. My name got into the hopper at DC, and Dick Giordano was in the market for an editor. Uh, Andy Helfer was editing John Byrne on Superman and was putting more energy into relaunching the Justice League after they had relaunched the Superman books. And they wanted somebody to work on the Superman books. And John had worked with me at Marvel, and he said, "I can work with Mike. He's great. That's perfect." And so I worked with John on Fantastic Four, and he was definitely a big part of me getting my foot in the door at DC. But that's how people like Dick Giordano and Paul Levitz started becoming aware of me. So I got I got a job editing there, and I worked on the Superman books with Andy for a couple of months to get the lay of the land, and then I started being the, I would say, liaison on Superman. I don't think I was the editor of Superman until John Byrne left, because ultimately, A, he was there first. B, I've always said this also about like the X-Men books. It's like whether I liked what Chris Claremont was doing or not, it wouldn't matter. If they made me the editor, I would trust whatever Chris wanted to do because his finger was on some pulse that I was unable to figure out, and it was working. So why screw with it? And Byrne was the same way at that time. They both had just some kind of wild intuition about what would work and what wouldn't work, and why mess with that? So it wasn't until after John left that I said, I think I'm the editor of this now, and I'm going to have to start having my finger on some pulses. And I put together a team that worked out really great.
So, what was it like being the custodian of what is potentially the most legendary fictional character in history, or one of them at the very
as
least?
I said, my mother was a big Superman fan, so Superman comics were always around. My earliest memory as a child, and this is going to sound corny, but it's really true, was waking up on a gurney in a hospital with Superman comics on my lap. And I had just had my tonsils taken out, and I was being wheeled into the room where my mother was because she just had her tonsils taken out. We both had, it was a double tonsillectomy. And she had arranged to have these Superman comics on my lap so I'd have something to look at. And that's I mean, I was like 2 or 3. I wasn't reading them, but I was looking at them. And so Superman was always there. I also felt the real need to not let my mother down. How stupid that is, I don't know. And at the same, I worked at Marvel for almost 5 years, and the minute I got hired at DC, my mother said, "Can I come up and see where the DC comics come from?" So she was a DC fan. So I didn't want to let her down. I knew what it meant to people. I knew Superman was a big deal, but I also knew that we needed to be reverent, but not afraid to do something different. Because, a lot of people want comics to stay the same way all the time. A lot of people want what they liked when they were kids, and they want it to stay that way or go that way again. And it's like, that's not the way to keep something around for 85 years. It has to evolve, it has to change. And also, you have to find new angles because all the stories have been done. Even the death of Superman was done before we got there. It had happened before. Jerry Siegel wrote it himself. The creator of Superman wrote a Death of Superman story. So we altered it because the storytelling of the 80s and 90s had become more long form. So we stretched it out, but we added a lot of stuff to it. It wasn't just he's dead. Oh, wait, he's back. It was like he's dead, he's back, but there's 4 of them. Oh my God. And it's like you just have to be additive while being reverential. And it sounds funny to say we killed the character is reverential, but it really was. It was motivated by us trying to say, hey, all you people who are liking the antiheroes and the Punishers and Wolverines, and you think Superman is corny, well, how about if he's not there? What would you think then? And we wrote the civilians of Metropolis, and their reaction was what we thought the readers should think. And it turned out they did. And what happened was they announced that Superman was going to die. And, all the reporters in the world, they just hooked on this story. And it's like, it was a slow news day. If Madonna had a baby or war broke out, we would not have been on the front page, but we were on the front page of a Long Island newspaper. And what I learned is that the reporters, they don't necessarily find news, they copy news from each other. But then it was like a virus. It was viral without there being a computer involved. And everybody just wanted to do it. But more often than not, the reporters would say, if they were women, they say, I wanted to be a reporter because of Lois Lane. And the guys would say, I wanted to be a reporter because of Clark Kent.
Mm,
So they were mad that we were killing Superman because that was their inspiration.
mm.
And it was kind of fun to be involved in that. And also I felt kind of silly because it's like, why would I really kill Superman want if I want to stay employed? It doesn't make any sense. So it worked out for everybody.
So, as you said, you killed off Superman because you kind of wanted to prove that he was relevant still, even in the 90s.
Yeah.
So, now looking back and where we are with Superman now, do you think he has remained relevant at that point going forward? Or what do you think about how audiences now are relating to the character?
Well, I wouldn't say he's remained relevant consistently,
Mm,
depending on who the creative team is, whatever it's either working or it's not working. And that is decided by the audience more than me.
mm,
I will say that the couple of issues I've read of the most recent contributors of the Superman books, I think they're doing it right. They're getting it. It seems to be working because of things that I think work about Superman. And for me, Superman was always better when he had the civilian characters on screen.
mm,
It wasn't just Superman and the other heroes all the time. And it wasn't Superman and a villain all the time. It was, how does this affect a regular person? Because the person reading this is a regular person.
mm,
The fact that they were able to get 100 issues out of Jimmy Olsen comics and Lois Lane comics was because people want to read about people
mm,
and they want to be in awe of the superhero. And you need to have that kind of reaction. And I think for a lot of years, not just Superman, but many, many comics at all the companies have been only about this superhero club where, okay, they have some problems like we do, but
mm,
it's still not really our problems,
mm.
because if Superman has Spider-Man has a cold, Superman has a cold, that's not the same kind of cold I'm going to have. But if Jimmy Olsen has a cold, that I can identify with.
So, what do you think about darker or brooding versions of Superman?
I think they're okay in their place if there's a point to the story. I think that, we did a whole story right when Byrne left. Byrne, the last thing he did was he had Superman kill 3 Kryptonians. And a lot of people were upset that Superman should never kill.
Mm,
And my take on that was always like, this is why he will never kill. First of all, they were people from another dimension. So they weren't they weren't humans. They weren't people that, and they were really bad, like Zod getting killed in the movies.
mm,
It was definitely, I think it was a shocking, justified move, but it shouldn't have just stopped there. It needed to be, what does this do to Superman? Is
mm,
he happy he did this? Does he go and kill every villain because now it's easy?
mm,
No, he kind of went into a funk and he got in like a split personality for a while because he was trying to bury this horrible thing that he did. And
mm,
then he exiled himself into outer space. And we got not just getting years worth of stories out of it, it was realistic.
mm,
It was more like, even though it's a fantastic character, it was more realistic.
mm,
And it wasn't just like, oh well, I killed somebody next, which is what a lot of the characters are these days. Even I
mm.
watch these John Wick movies and I'm like, wow, that guy should have some kind of conscience problem at some point.
I think he's killed so many at this point. I think he's probably numb. He's I
Well,
can I don't know what his body count is, but it's probably in the hundreds.
oh, easy, hundreds per movie.
Yeah. So obviously, looking back at the history of, especially the death of Superman, I've heard different stories about who first pitched the concept of killing Superman for that series. So who was it really? And what was your reaction?
Well, my version of the real story is that we would have these Superman summits where we get all the writers and artists and even the colorist
Mm,
in a room and we'd plan out a year's worth of stories. And sometimes we'd be blocked. We wouldn't have anything to put into the issues. I would literally draw boxes on the wall for each comic that would be coming out in the year and when they would be coming out, so we knew when to do our Christmas stories and all that. And we would fill them in with stories, and everybody got to basically figure out their own title. But because we were tying all the stories together, you did have to kind of help other people along so that they would help you too on your stories. And several years we would just come to a block and just nobody was saying anything, and it wasn't going good, or ideas were coming out, and I'd say, and then what? And there was nothing. And it was just like, it wasn't working. So Jerry Ordway would every year say, let's just kill him. And everyone would go, ha ha ha. How about we have lunch and then we come back? And then we would go to lunch and come back with great stories. And that went for a couple of years. And then we were planning to get Lois and Clark got engaged in the comics. And which was a big deal. Again, not to it was important to not be afraid to do things that hadn't happened before. And luckily, my bosses, Jeanette Kahn and Paul Levitz, agreed that stuff needed to move along, because Lois, thinking that Clark wasn't Superman and only Superman is the ideal man, it's so retro and it makes her look dumb. We felt it was really important that she fall in love with Clark, but then Clark couldn't go through with a wedding without telling her the truth. So we had them, get together, get engaged. He told his secret to her, and we were planning to do a wedding. But then Hollywood had interest in doing what we were doing, because Jeanette and I put together a pitch package for a show that we called Lois Lane's Planet. And that evolved into Lois and Clark. And it was, again, a lot about the civilians of the town. And it was definitely focused on their relationship and that kind of stuff. So there was interest, and they were going ahead into production with Lois and Clark. So they were going to start with them as separate characters, just meeting. It was going to take a while for them to get to the point where they might get married. So we thought, Jeanette and I, not Hollywood, nobody told us to do this. We went to our next meeting where we were planning to have them get married in Adventures of Superman number 500. And we told the guys, we want to hold off on this in case Lois and Clark works. If it doesn't work, we can get right to the wedding later. If it does work, we'll get to the wedding in a couple of years. And they were pretty mad. They were pissed off. They were like, well, what if I'm not on the book in 5 years or whatever? It's like, I said, you guys are going to be the guys who do this. Don't worry about it. And that was one of those meetings where nobody wanted to talk and everybody was mad. And somebody said Jerry's old idea. I don't know if it was Jerry this time or if Dan Jurgens said it, but somebody said, well, then we're just going to have to kill him. And Jurgens had been wanting to do a story that was not about the villain being smarter than Superman or being, even physically more aggressive than Superman. It was just that he should go up against what we called a natural disaster. He was a living hurricane, a tornado, an earthquake. He was all of that rolled into one. And it wasn't motivated. It was as arbitrary as nature is. So we combined that together, and Jurgens had an anniversary-ish number coming up for number 75, and then Adventures 500 was coming up right after that. So we said, all right, if we are going to kill Superman, what happens next? Because just killing him is not a story to me. I would even argue that our little trade paperback called The Death of Superman is not a story. It's the start of a story. And the good stuff is what came next when I said, what happens next? And we got all of the Metropolis stuff, all of the civilian stuff, all of the Ma and Pa Kent stuff, which is amazing.
Mm.
I say this in every interview. The scene where Bibbo is praying to God, saying, "Why did you take Superman instead of me? I'm just a schmuck." It's like I'm getting goosebumps now just talking about it. It's like it's the greatest stuff of all time. I think the Funeral for a Friend section is the reason the death of Superman is a good story.
Mm.
Because you got to see again the follow-up, the aftermath. What did it mean? It's one thing to have Superman kill the Kryptonian villains, but what does it mean?
Mm.
And that's what this was. Then the story got so popular, like the sales were so ridiculous. We had an emergency meeting saying we got to come up with we can't just have Superman sit up in a casket in Adventures 500, which was partly the plan. Part of the plan was that Pa Kent was going to have a heart attack at the thought of his son being dead. And then he and Superman would be heading towards the light of heaven or wherever, and they would save each other in the astral plane. And that's still in Adventures number 500. But then it was, again, if Superman just sits up in a casket, it's the most anticlimactic, boring thing in the universe. But that's what we were kind of heading towards. And so everybody was saying, holy mackerel, this is getting big. We got to come up with something that tops this. And all the guys wanted to come back with a Superman who was so different that the world would be shocked. But they all wanted their Superman to be the one we picked to do. And then Louise Simonson said, why don't we do them all? And I was like, thank you. That's the answer. I went to Paul and Jeanette. I said, we want to do 4 new Superman. We won't know who is the real Superman, if any. And that was how, and everybody got to do what they wanted to do. So they, while it was still interlocked together, for several months, they basically had their own books. So Louise Simonson and John Bogdanoff had their Steel story to tell. Carl Kiesel and Tom Grummett got their Superboy story to tell. Roger Stern and Jackson Geist got to do, the Eradicator, and Jurgens got to do the Cyborg. And it was great. And then they would dovetail back together again, and we had the great Reign of the Superman thing, which all of those things back to back is the story. And it is literally a beginning, a middle, and an end. Death is the beginning, funeral is the middle, and the reign is the end. And it works because there was no real internet back then. Because we were able to keep secrets, we were able to have surprises. People wouldn't ruin the surprises as quickly because it was hard. There's no way we could have kept the secret of the Cyborg being the bad Superman for as long as we did. And it was a real surprise. And it really did help keep the train running. It kept the excitement level up for that year. And we always knew we were going to get back to bringing Superman to life. But we made it a much more interesting story. And we timed it so that it was the same month that Lois and Clark premiered on TV. And then we did some more stories, and then Lois and Clark kind of screwed us and said, oh, by the way, we're doing the wedding, and here's the script. And we were like, what? We were supposed to do this together. And the script they wrote is not my favorite. It's not my favorite wedding story for Superman and Lois. But we still had our notes from earlier, and all the stuff we had planned around Adventures 500, we did into the Superman wedding special. And that was written and drawn by all the Superman guys. And we even brought back people like, John Byrne contributed to it. We had Kurt Swan pages in there, even though he had already passed away. But I had an inventory story that he had done. So we worked those pages into the story so that he could be a part of it. And it was like, it really worked out well for everybody. And everybody who was worried about being around to do the wedding of Superman, they were involved.
That's awesome.
Happy ending.
So, so when you first came out, as you said, there, talking about the four Supermen who would be the reign of Superman, and you talked about bringing, having them all, doing them all. Did you already decide which one was going to be the villain, or was it a determination of which one felt like was going to become a villain?
No, what Jurgens wanted to do the bad guy. It was all his idea. And look, honestly, you look at the characters. Who looks like a bad guy? The guy with half a skull face made of metal. I mean, he looks like a bad guy. We played the Eradicator as a little bit of a bad guy because he was kind of, robotic like the Terminator and, unfeeling and unearthly. But he was like that before, and he's still like that. And he's just not, he's not the bad guy. His motivations are a little harder to understand for us. He's there to protect the last Kryptonian. That's all his motivation is.
So when the four Supermen were created, when the two of the characters that have endured the most is Steel and Superboy. Did you know those were characters that were going to and had plans to for those to endure, or they just proved popular and you were not going to originally make them into their own things later?
If anybody says they know for sure that something's going to work, they're lying or they're deluding themselves. We didn't know who was going to work or who didn't work, but it was pretty clear right from the start that even just as an editor being the first reader of a story, they were cool characters, and they were not Superman. They were not clones. They were their own thing. Well, Superboy was a clone, but he had a personality.
Right.
And it was a personality that we didn't have in any of our books at DC at that time. And Steel was just a really good character in general. He's the heart of Superman. He had the heart of Superman. And Superboy, I guess, had the enthusiasm and joy of what it would be like to have powers. And so we knew they were good. And then, we also put out a Supergirl miniseries at that point, but our Supergirl, many still consider not a real Supergirl because she was kind of just a blob of putty. So I get it, but we had aspiration for her too. And she went on to get her own series for a while that Peter David wrote. And so, I mean, we got a lot out of this one dumb idea. And the Eradicator had kind of been around before the Death of Superman story happened. And he was just part of our cast of characters. We never really thought that he would go on. He got some miniseries and stuff, and he ended up being in The Outsiders for a while. So he served a purpose as well. He just wasn't, if you're a character that is kind of emotionless, readers don't care what your emotions are. They don't care about you as much.
Did you have a favorite of the four?
A favorite
of the four?
No, Superman,
No.
the real Superman. My favorite. No, nah. I think they all, they all served a purpose in the big picture of the story. I would say that they all had different aspects that worked for their genre. I mean, the Steel stuff brought a lot of what Iron Man is to the Marvel universe into the DC universe, and that was good. There was an irreverence to Superboy's comic, but also Carl Kiesel's idea of setting it in Hawaii brought a real, just more exotic element to the story. It was just like, well, how come nobody else thought of that? And I hope he took some trips to Hawaii and wrote it off on his taxes, because it definitely was a good factor and a good angle. So yeah, I think they all served their purpose, but the whole goal for all of us was always make Superman look good. It's all about Superman. And when people would leave the Superman team, new people were brought in, and it was always like, nobody's the boss of this. Not even me. Nobody's the boss of this except Superman. Everybody check your egos at the door. It's only Superman matters. And we all basically signed up for that job, and I think we got better stuff out of it because of that.
Mm. Well, later you became the DC's Entertainment's creative director of animation. So what did that entail?
Well, that was kind of a fun, fortuitous thing. When the DC Entertainment was created out of DC, there was some new bosses around, and one of them was Jeff Johns, who was a writer. He worked on Richard Donner's movies. He didn't go back as far as Superman, but he's worked on a lot of movies with Richard Donner. He pitched Stargirl as a comic, and I approved it. And when his editor left, I took it over, and we really did. I think we did a good job creating a character, and she just had her own show for a little while. And these are that's what you hope for this stuff, is for it to resonate for at least a little bit of time. But he became I guess the chief creative officer, and he wanted people out in California with the rest of the new team who were going to understand the characters and to be advocates for the characters. And so whether that was in film or animation or whatever, or video games, so it was all the stuff that wasn't comic book publishing. And I never liked snow, even though it was nice that I lived in New York and it helped me get in the business and all that. If I never see snow again, I'll be very happy. If a movie is on TV and it starts snowing, I change the channel because I can't take it. I don't like it. But so I was like, he goes, there was rumors that DC was going to move to California because of the new bosses were based in California. And he said, if all of DC doesn't move to California, would you be interested in moving to California? And what that meant was that publishing was going to stay in New York still, and he needed people to work on animation and movies. And I was like, yes, I would be very interested. And my wife has a vote, but she says yes, and I'll tell her.
Smart.
And it really was just, my wife had a job where she could work on the phone remotely.
Yeah.
And it was perfect. And honestly, the weather is great. It's great to live here. And again, I get to work on the same characters and stories. The better part for me was that I didn't have to worry about the deadlines or schedules or hiring writers and artists or firing writers and artists or anything like that, because Warner Brothers Animation, our sister company, did all that. And I was there as a helper. It was like, and the lucky thing for me was they love our characters as much as we do. They're all fans of the comics. Bruce Timms and Paul Dini's and James Tucker's, they all love our stuff. And in some cases, they might even know it better than we did. And it was just like, it was easy. And once in a while, they could try to do something that they thought was a good idea, but I'd say, well, here's why it's not a good idea. And it might have been a corporate reason. It might have been a creator contract reason. Things they wouldn't have any knowledge of. And that was what my job was. And I was also there as a story editor, to the degree of, I would send notes and help them shape the stories and the direction of things. So, honestly, I mean, I do in my heart believe that those are the best movies with DC characters out there, live action or otherwise.
Yes. I would say the best. I will agree that the best movies definitely were the animation one. I mean, all the way back even to Batman Fantastic, which is still the best Batman movie I think ever made.
Batman movie ever.
I mean, you watch Flashpoint, the cartoon, and the Flash, the movie one. We all know which one's best is the cartoon.
I still haven't seen Flashpoint, the Flash movie yet, but I'll get to it one of these days.
So why do you think the animation is so much better or more successful than the live action has been in recent time?
Well, I mean, I can't speak for why the movies are the way they are. I think that Warner Brothers as a company has a style where they do hand over the keys to the car to people who they believe in, and then just kind of let them do whatever they want. And that's not the same kind of collaboration that we do in comics and or the animation. I mean, it's not one man's vision. Like as I said, it's a check your ego at the door kind of
Mm,
job. And so I think it's because there's less eyes on us, so there's less pressure, I
mm,
guess, in a way. There's less money involved, so there's less pressure. It doesn't cost as much to make a comic book. It doesn't cost as much to make an animated movie
mm.
as a $200 million blockbuster. That if it sucks, that's a bad waste of money.
Right, right.
If a comic book sucks, oh well, next. So it's tough.
Mm,
It's tough. And again, I don't want to, I have opinions about the movies, and I can tell you why I don't think they work or why I think they're great in various areas. But I do think, speaking just in terms of consistency, even before I worked on the movies,
mm,
Mask of the Phantasm on, they they knew what they were doing.
mm,
And are there episodes that are not as good as the ones before or after? Yeah, but that's in anything. That's
mm,
anything that lives a long life. Again, these characters, Superman's 85, they can't all be masterpieces, you know? So everybody does their best. And it's not about the creators so much. You don't know who the creators of the animation are. Maybe Bruce Timm,
mm,
but other than that, it's about the characters, and
mm,
that's what matters. And they are as reverential as we were in the comics.
mm.
At the same time, they get that you need to do something that hasn't been done before.
So, what is next for you? I know you're retired,
Uh,
but what's next?
I'm all I do is interviews now. No, the plan for me is no plan. The plan is, I've retired from DC. If somebody wants to call me and talk to me about doing something, if someone wants me to read something for a penny or two, I'm happy to do that. Uh, but I bought a lot of books over the last 40 years that I've never had time to read. So I might do that. TV and streaming has never been better. There's more shows on that are worthwhile and are interesting. And as I've always done my whole life, I look at them and I say, what can I steal from this? And that's the way to be as far as I'm concerned.
Mm. Oh,
So I'll do all that kind of stuff. And my new job is going to doctors, I think.
well, Mr. Carlin, it's been an absolute honor to talk with you, sir. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
I hope there was something in there that made sense, or that anyone cares about.
It was fantastic, and I love looking back at the comic books in the 90s where I got started reading comic books. So thank you so much.
I look forward to seeing the edited version of this.
You definitely will. It will be out probably within a week.
Sounds good. Have a good 4th of July.